It just said,
Um, yeah,
okay,
now we're live.
they're on.
So now people are getting an alert that we're here, and hopefully they'll start joining us.
All right.
You may see the little number go up, or I don't know. Try not to pay attention to that. But thanks. Yeah,
You see,
thanks for joining.
if I'm far back enough, I won't be able to see anyway, so it won't make any difference. I'll just assume
Well,
it's just you and me having a little chat by ourselves.
it's just you and me having a little chat with the internet. Hi Oliver, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me here.
I'm happy that we're doing this because I met you at our mutual friend Hugh's Christmas party a couple years ago.
Was that? Yeah,
A while back.
It was a while back. It wasn't the last one. I think it was the one before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I obviously am always trying to get people to tell their stories, and you've told your story in an amazing memoir and in another book. So you have two books out about your story. But I actually happened to read, I think I read your first book first. And so now I have the backstory because this is it's a multiple coming out memoir, right? Because it's you discovering your sexuality and then gender identity. Yeah. So tell me first, let's just start. Frighten the Horses. You've been doing the whole thing where you have to talk about your life story that has now been in this incredibly written piece, but then you have to talk about it and talk to people like me and reiterate it again. What's that been like? Is it weird just talking about your life all the time?
Yeah, the one thing that it made me realize is that there's like a shelf limit on wanting to be the main character. And, after you've been talking about your memoir for a year and you've been writing it for several years prior to that, you're kind of like, God, I just want to talk about somebody who's not me for a while.
We're going to talk about you more.
So we're going to talk about them more today. So that's weird. And also what's weird is how rapidly things have changed in the last year since it came out in ways that we really couldn't have imagined. And then sort of looking back at the memoir and the book of essays I wrote before and going, whoa, we are not in that place anymore. And so there's part of me that's like, well, okay, I feel weird that I had all these concerns back then that kind of just seem completely irrelevant now. But also there's a part of me that is glad that I was part of putting that period of time down in history.
Right.
Because I got a blurb from Sarah Schulman, which I sort of couldn't believe when I managed to get a blurb from Sarah Schulman. But one of the things that she pointed out was, that this really is a tribute to all of the support mechanisms that have sprung up around trans people over the last sort of 10 years. Because, my story wouldn't have happened if all of those support mechanisms hadn't been in place. And they were in place at the time of writing, and now, of course, they're all being dismantled. So it's quite nice to have kind of encapsulated that brief moment when it was sort of okay for trans people before everything started going pear-shaped.
Well, I mean, that's actually a really good point to start because, I've read Jenny Boyle's memoir, and of course, she talks about how there wasn't anything for her to read at the time. And then I've talked to Kate Bornstein about this, and Kate's like, we didn't even have language for any of this at the time. Like, there was no chance that we were talking about being non-binary, or we didn't even use queer really in main parlance. And so in a way, it's great in your book when you're like, oh, I start questioning this, I'm in denial. I go and Google it and I say, what are the trans memoirs? What are the books that I should do? And then you have this amazing scene where you're like, oh shit, the books show up, and I try to hide them under my bed, and the dog gets in there and tears them to pieces.
And distributes them around the house.
Yeah. So now you're part of that canon of books, and people are Googling you and now looking to you as this elder to teach them when you were doing the same thing just, decades
only a
ago.
short while ago. Yeah. And so it's weird because I'm an elder because I'm an old person at the grand old age of 54, but I don't feel like I'm an elder because I only came out as trans in 2017. So, I'm still, I'm 7 years in, but I'm still relatively new, whereas someone like Kate or Jenny has been, doing this for decades. So in fact, I was on a panel with Kate and Jenny a couple of months ago, and we were having this exact conversation about who are your elders. And I was saying the weird thing is, I mean, obviously Kate and Jenny were my elders because they were the books that I read when I started coming out. But the weird thing is that really my elders are people who are younger than me. So I'm turning to people who are, of the millennial generation, who came out when they were teenagers and then started transitioning and have, although they're younger, have been essentially doing it or talking about it or writing about it for longer than I. So it's this weird sort of crisscrossing of generations that goes on at the moment. But I think that what is true is that period of time between, sort of in the mid 2010s, there was a period of time where a lot of people came out. Yeah. And when you look back, you can see so many people came out like within a space of a few years of the time when I came out. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that is because the time was finally right. There was a combination of, an enormous amount of visibility, a lot more trans stuff being published, a lot more people coming out collectively, social media and the internet making it easier for people to find each other, the hospitals beginning to understand what gender affirming care was, that being more available, people writing about that. So suddenly we all, the books and the language were available, and the medical care was available, and the backlash hadn't started yet. And so there was this great surge in trans people going, wow, I can finally do this.
Right.
And then, of course, unfortunately, that itself is what then generated the backlash that we're in now.
And I actually want to talk about that specifically for several reasons. But first, I want to go back to what you were saying about not feeling like an elder because you have a sort of queer age. And I actually talk about that. When I was younger, I used to say I had a certain gay age. And even though, for example, my husband's older than you and we have 11 years between us, I always say that we're the same age in a way because I came out at 15 and he came out at 25.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like we have the same
gay age.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I totally. And the other thing that I was doing the other day was, I know absolutely nothing about horoscopes. It's not my thing. But I was with a bunch of people, and we were there was somebody there who was guessing everybody's horoscopes. Yeah. And they guessed mine wrong.
And that was probably millennial because they're always doing that.
Yeah, which is great. All power to them. But they guessed mine wrong, and so I was like, "Yeah, you're not as smart as you thought you were." But then we discovered that the horoscope that they guessed was my trans horoscope.
Oh,
so they'd put my horoscope on the day that I first started taking testosterone, and I'm like, "Okay, that's kind of cool. Then maybe you got that more right than I thought you had."
Right.
I mean, that's just an aside, but yes, absolutely. There is a rebirth involved. But somebody asked me in a podcast a little while ago, they were talking about second adolescences. Yes. And there was an expectation that my second adolescence happened when I transitioned, but actually my second adolescence happened when I came out as a lesbian, which was 7 years previously.
Right.
So that was when, despite the fact that I didn't have testosterone in my body, that's when my kind of hormones went wild. Because I had gone from 40 years of kind of not celibacy, because obviously I was sort of, I have 4 children to show for it. But, but yeah, 40 years of just like never having got what the whole thing was about, because for me, it was just ghastly. To suddenly...
Well, that is actually one of the things I think you write so beautifully and so elegantly in the memoir is about discovering your sexuality, but also discovering that love. You actually, and I wrote this down, I was going to play it for you, but instead I'll just read it. But you say, you'd pretty much given up on love by the time you'd met Charles, which is your ex-husband. I'd never felt anything close to what the poets wrote about. So I don't know. I just began to question the authenticity of their descriptions. I assumed the whole notion of romantic love must be nonsense peddled by mentally unstable, creative people to make the rest of us feel inadequate, like it was the equivalent of fashion magazines promoting unattainable body images to teenagers. So first, bravo. That's a really beautiful bit of writing. And I know that it sounds even more amazing when you narrated in the audiobook, which I've listened to because it has your accent. But that, I mean, that's fantastic because I think a lot of people, but I think a lot of people, trans, gay, queer, they can relate to this because they also give up on it, right?
Yeah. And then of course you discover it. And then you go through in your 40s what you should have gone through when you were 16, which is embarrassing. Because by the time you're 40, you really should have, like, you know, your emotional maturity should have moved past that. But you know, I mean, that's certainly what happened to me. And when I ran the late bloomers group, we used to, you know, we used to talk about this, that everybody would have what we called a catalyst. So there was a woman who was their catalyst, and it was like a rebound relationship on speed, because this was the ultimate relationship that was giving you everything that no relationship ever had, and there was just absolutely no chance that any of them were going to survive because they were all just too extreme, because you're feeling all of the emotions. I mean, in fact, some of them did survive, but it was very rare, because you're feeling all the emotions, and no relationship could really kind of survive that kind of dysregulation, emotional dysregulation. So yeah, so I had so second adolescence happened then, and then by the time I transitioned, really I'd kind of got through it. So transitioning felt much calmer for me. You know, it just felt much more.
Well, but on top of that, you are parenting and you're trying to be a great parent. And I have to say, at least from reading your memoir, your kids are amazing and you seem like a really cool parent. And
yeah,
so
I don't think they think I'm a cool parent at all. I think they think I'm just embarrassing at this point. I mean, this is the thing. By the time I was transitioning, they were teenagers.
Yeah.
So the teenage stuff, that was their territory now. And it was my job just to be as unobtrusive in the background as I possibly could be. And that is still a challenge, because I live in the suburbs, and it's very difficult to be an unobtrusive trans man in the suburbs. And so
yeah, tell me about that. I mean, you have, as you said, the queer house in Connecticut. What is that like, being in the suburbs? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, you go out and people look at you funny, or?
No, it's not so much that people look at me funny, because a lot of the time I just pass as a very small, slightly effeminate looking man.
They're like, who's that elf walking down the street?
Who's that little elf walking down the street? So I live in a really nice neighborhood. And for this area, it's pretty diverse, which a lot of the neighborhoods, I mean, Fairfield, Connecticut is predominantly white and predominantly heterosexual. And there are, little, queer niches around here. But it's exactly what you would expect a Connecticut suburb to be like. And so what it feels like always is that I'm just a bit different. Mm-hmm. And so, the neighborhood is really friendly, and everybody in the neighborhood are super nice to me, but I always feel a little bit like the sore thumb. But
haven't you always felt that way your whole life?
I have always felt that way, but the thing is, is that when I go into Brooklyn, I don't anymore. In fact, when I go into Brooklyn, I feel like kind of really boring and ordinary, because I'm just like a passing, trans man. Is like, I just wear linen shirts and there's nothing kind of interesting about me at all. Whereas here, and that makes me feel really happy, because when I get into that environment, I just I disappear. I feel invisible, and that feels great to me, because I'm just one of a crowd. As I was saying, this may come as a surprise to some of my exes, but I don't actually like being the main character. Mm-hmm. I love being in Brooklyn, because then I can just disappear into the crowd and I just become one of a morass of weirdo freaks, and everybody is more weirdo and freaky than me, which is lovely. Whereas when I'm here, I just always feel different. And I always feel like when I'm talking to people, I'm constantly having to pay attention to the difference between who I am and what they perceive, and the difference between what they understand about me and, what I am. So if I'm talking to people, I'm constantly questioning, do they know I'm trans? If they don't know
Right.
I'm trans, how are they reading me? Do they assume I'm a gay man? If they don't assume that I'm a gay man, are they assuming I'm a straight man? And what does that say about how I interact with them? And so I have to negotiate, I have to code switch all the time.
Yes.
And, my daughters are, the thing about having teenagers is teenagers are self-conscious about their parents. That's a given, right? They want their parents to be as normal, as unobtrusive as possible. And that is
Or
our
as
job as
absent as
parents.
possible.
Exactly. And so when they are out with me, they are super conscious of the fact that I'm different. So they will say things to me like, you're too friendly for a man. You can't be that nice. You're too smiley. You make too many jokes. And I'm like, that's just who I am. This is how I work. This is how I operate. This is how I communicate. But they're like, it's weird. It's embarrassing. This is not how people do this. And I want to say to them, no, that's not how people around here do this. Because the men around here, they wear their chinos and their shirts and they don't smile too much and they're a little bit more reserved. And the women are all friendly and chatty and having a great time, but the men a little bit, and I don't do that. I refuse to conform to those kind of gender stereotypes.
Well, in some ways also you get a pass because of your accent. Because as you've said, you said even before, like, do people like me because I'm charming or because I'm British or because I'm
these
whatever.
two things interchangeable. Exactly. So, I mean, the thing is that if it was just me, I'd be like, fuck all of you.
Right.
I'm just going to be myself and you're going to have to deal with it whatever way you can. But I do have to recognize that I've got the kids to take into consideration too.
Well, I think what you're talking about passing is interesting because you often in the book talk about how you identify as a gay man who has sex with lesbians. And and I think that's really interesting because, often when I think that I can pass, then I realize, oh yeah, I smile too much, I'm too nice. And people are like, oh, he can't be straight because he's too friendly, which is a weird thing about masculinity, which is part of the book I think everybody should read if they're queer or not, because I think you really investigate masculinity in a great way. And I will say, having trans male friends who are often much hairier and more mask presenting than I am, I'm like, what, am I supposed to be less of a man because I can't grow facial hair or I have no body hair and things like that?
Yeah.
And you talk about that as well,
So and that was, that was always, I suppose the trans adolescence for me was figuring out how I wanted to present physically. Do I want to beef up and get the muscles and grow the beard and do that whole thing? And I experimented with it. But I thought, okay, I'm gonna have a month of growing a beard and we'll see how that works out.
And everyone's like, no.
So this is why you need best friends. Because my best friend Cara lives in New York and she came up for the weekend and I went to pick her up from the train station and she got in the car and she looked at me and she went,
no.
Because it was a bootstrap beard.
Oh, yeah,
and it was ginger. And she said, honey, you look like a garden gnome. And I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm done. No more beard. That ain't going to happen. So, I've settled into this, which, as my daughters say, you just look like a little gay man. And I'm like, okay, that's good enough. I'm probably not going to pick up a woman at a party if I come across as a little gay man, but that's fine. I've kind of made my peace with that. But at least when people see me, if they're not seeing the whole picture, at least they recognize my queerness.
Right.
So they recognize that I come from the queer community in some aspect, even if they don't clock that I'm trans. Whereas in Brooklyn, everybody clocks that I'm trans because they know what trans people look like,
Right. But this idea of passing is also interesting because in the trans community, there is the idea of stealth and wanting to pass. And the first time I kind of got woken up to it was T. Cooper, who had been a very out and proud trans male writer, had married a woman, had kids, and was living in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. And he said, I don't want people to know, like, I'm passing. And that's was my goal. And he sort of disavowed the queer community. And I thought, oh, that's interesting because that you go through transitions of other types. And yet you've found so much community within these queer spaces that you haven't said, like, that's my goal.
Yeah, no, I did the opposite because, I'm trying to get out of this environment and spend more time in the queer community because those are the people who I relate to and understand, and we all speak the same language, and I just feel really at home there. So, the weird thing for me has been kind of trying to reconcile myself with the fact that the way. So, if one assumes that when you transition, what you're trying to do is manifest outwardly how you feel most comfortable, right? And outwardly, how I feel most comfortable manifesting physically is in a very traditionally masculine way. So, my clothes are just very ordinary chinos, linen shirts. There's nothing, I mean, apart from maybe my tattoos and my mannerisms, that's particularly overt. I don't have piercings. I don't wear kind of, I'm such a boring dresser. I'm just a boring dresser. So there's nothing that's drawing attention to my gayness at all, right? And so in an environment where nobody is talking to me and I'm just walking down the street, I 100% pass. Nobody, if I was just like shopping at a, grocery store, nobody's going to pick up on the fact that I'm anything other than a man. And so that in itself is a weird sort of disavowal of my queerness and my community. So it is, I mean, I think it's almost impossible to be a trans person in the world and exist in a way that feels 100% authentic at all times, because we are living in a world where for so many people passing is a safety issue.
Right. And that's, so I think we should segue to that, and one way I wanted to do it is you have a scene where you talk about going to the men's room and people looking at you because you're waiting for a stall. And I guess I could say urinal because that's how you pronounce it. And I've been really fascinated by the bathroom talk over the last few decades, because we've been dealing with this for a long time, because it's always about the idea of trans women in women's spaces. Yeah. And no one actually talks about trans men in men's spaces, which I'm like, also, all of us gay men, like, if you're really worried about this, like, we're going into your bathroom and we are looking at you and we are sexualizing you. So if it was really about that, we'd be hearing that, and we're not. Yeah. And so that's one of those safe spaces that are unsafe.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
the bathroom issue, I think, really highlights the difference between living in the world as a trans man and living in the world as a trans woman, as a woman. And so there have been incidences where trans men have been attacked in male bathrooms, but they are few and far between. And it's normally because somebody, has gone in who clearly looks trans, and therefore that is just an action of hate towards a trans person. Right. That could have happened outside the bathroom as much as inside the bathroom, because it's not necessarily about the fact that he used the bathroom. It's just the fact that he's existing in public as trans, and there were some people who didn't like it, right? Whereas for trans women, it's very, very different because of this whole, this whole vendetta to make trans women look like they are terrifying and they have nefarious intent and all the rest of it. So when I first started going into men's bathrooms, it was uncomfortable before I had fully transitioned, before the hormones had done this to me. And then for a while I was like, is somebody going to clock the fact that I always use a stall? Until I realized that in a man's bedroom, in a man's bathroom, nobody wants to know what anybody else is doing in the stall. Literally, nobody wants to know what you're doing in there. You could be doing whatever you like, and nobody's going to bother you for it as long as you don't bother them. So it's never been an issue for me. Whereas for my trans femme friends, it's like the whole thing. It's like everything. In England, in this country, wherever you go, every single time you go out in public, if you're out for long enough that you're going to have to use a public restroom, you are going to be worrying about that, which is horrendous.
And so one of the things that prompted our discussion today was your recent essay that you posted on your Substack, which was about, should I leave? Or and I want to talk about it because I do think it's a question that people are asking. I actually have many friends who are trans, queer, straight, who are all asking, like, if we're in Weimar, Germany, like, when do you know it's time to get out? Like, when do you know you've waited too long?
Yeah.
And you know, because when we look back at history, we're always like, why did those people stay when the Nazis came? Like, why didn't they just leave? And then, of course, when you're actually living it, you don't just pick up and leave because you have a life and you have your family and you have all these things. So you wrote about that, and you mentioned that you didn't want to write about it because it makes it real once you write about it.
Yeah.
So what has the reaction been since you published that?
Well, the reaction has been okay. So I'll talk about my own personal reaction to it, and then the community. So my own personal reaction to having written it was a sense of relief, because it had been, and I'm very used to doing that thing where there's something over there that I don't want to see, and so I just kind of carry on like this, not looking at it, and that raises my anxiety levels, and it feels a little bit like what I was experiencing before I transitioned, you know, that kind of sense of dysphoria, that you're just the cognitive dissonance that you have to live with every day in order to ignore this thing that is getting bigger and bigger and bigger until you can't deny it. So I wrote the newsletter very quickly and published it immediately. And then after I published it, I'm like, okay, what is my plan B? So I spent the rest of that day figuring out what my plan B was. I would, you know, go back to England. I was looking at the situation in England and where I would live, and, you know, how I would sell the house here and what would happen to my kids, and, you know, just plotting that path in my head so that I could see it. And once I'd plotted it, and I'm like, okay, I don't want to do that, but that is something that I could do because I have dual citizenship.
You have
And,
a
you know,
plan,
my
yeah.
family live over there, and my kids are older now. You know, the last two are in junior at high school, so they've only got a couple of years. So this is doable, even if I don't want to do it. And knowing that it was something that was doable then brought me back to, I will not do this unless I absolutely have to. Because fundamentally, I would rather, and I say this, and flag up again, this is because I speak from a position of privilege, because I am white and able-bodied, and I'm trans-mass, not trans-femme. I would rather be part of a persecuted minority in this country where I'm with my friends and my community than be exiled and safe in another country but not be with my people. Because that is how it would feel if I went back to England. I have friends and family over there, but they're all from my previous life. And all of my friends and family from, you know, the last 17 years since I've been coming out as queer and transitioning, they're all here, and I do not want to leave them. I don't want to start again at this time of my life. So, and again, I mention in the essay this Paul Lynch book called The Prophets, and Paul Lynch is an Irish writer, and he writes about a fictional situation in Ireland where an uprising happens, and it's not, you know, explained what it is, but it sort of falls somewhere between the Irish Troubles and the rise of authoritarianism over here, and it follows this woman who is a mother as she ignores the signs, and she sees, and again, it speaks to the cognitive dissonance of seeing them but just not quite being able to act on them because you've got to do the laundry, or you've got to go get the groceries, or you've got to whatever. And the ending is very quiet but very shocking. When you see where he takes you to the end, it's worth reading the book just for that, because it hits really hard. And that is what then makes you think, God, you know, are the canaries in the coal mine already dying? And what am I supposed to be doing about this? So then within the community, I'm on a group chat with a lot of trans people. And what fascinates me about this group chat is it really shows me the difference between being on social media with trans people, being on trans Twitter or trans Blue Sky, and being in a group chat. Because on social media, there's a lot of alarmist talk, and there's conspiracy theories, and this might happen, and that might happen, and this is going to happen. And on the group chat, everybody's like keeping each other calm. It's like, no, we do not want to be panicked. We're all dealing with this. We all read the news. We all know what's going on out there. This is a space for just trying to support each other and lower anxiety levels and figure out what is actually true and what we need to do, and trying to find that balance between what is hyperbole and alarmist
Right.
and what is sticking your head in the sand.
Right.
And where is that place where you can acknowledge the stuff that is happening and the stuff that might happen without just throwing everything up into the air, setting everything on fire and leaving the country before it's actually necessary. And so that's the kind of space that we're in at the moment.
And it's true. And you mentioned Erin in the Morning, which is a Substack that I follow, and I'm impressed what she and her organization is able to do on the shoestring, because they're doing better reporting than a lot of other places.
I will just say at this moment, anybody who is watching this, please subscribe to Erin in the Morning and pay for your subscription, because I mean the work that this woman is doing is absolutely incredible and so invaluable and as far away from alarmist and hyperbole as you could possibly get. She is every single day just coming up with the facts, delivering them. I mean, it's really extraordinary work.
But there are these alarmist people who will get in the comments, and I have to say I'm a paid subscriber partly because I want to engage in the comments, and it's because I sometimes have to remind people, these are not laws, these are executive orders, or these are just fear tactics. This is this is chaos. This is not real. I mean, it is real, but it is not what people sometimes are saying in the headlines.
And I think it's real because they're trying to make it happen. It's not real because they're not. In some areas, they're not succeeding. So they're succeeding in some places and failing in others. But the fight has not been won. And the fight on their part has not been won. And the fight on our part has not been abandoned. And so constantly what I'm seeing is, are you still there? Are you frozen? Okay, is this me who's frozen or you who's frozen? Okay, this might be my... Okay, I apologize if anybody is not hearing this, because Jerry has just frozen and I don't know if I'm off. Oh no, Jerry's internet connection has gone down. Okay, so I'm going to keep going until Jerry comes back on again. What was I saying? Oh yes, so some of these things have been passed, and specifically when we're talking about youth access to gender affirming care, that is being shut down all across the country. Okay, here we go. Jerry's coming back in again. Okay. Thank you, Bob. I'm just trying to get Jerry back in. Thank you for telling me that you can still hear me. I think Jerry's going to try and join again. I do not know how this whole Substack thing works. So if somebody logs off, I don't know how we get them back on again. Maybe I should invite him. God, I wish I was better at this kind of stuff. Maybe I would just... Oh, here we go. Jerry Paul. Okay, you should invite him. Okay, live. God damn it.
Am I back? Great. But now let me make sure I can hear you.
I've turned my. There we go.
There you are.
I was just randomly. Thank you, Shelley. I was randomly pressing buttons in the
We did
hope
it.
that I could get you back. This is my equivalent to like bashing the side of the TV back in the 1980s. If you just press every button, something might happen because I won't know freaking idea why.
Or you blow on it like we did with Nintendo games.
Yes, well, exactly. No, but I'm older than that, unfortunately. For me, it's just a good bash on the side of the TV set, and everything will come back into play.
So we were saying that it's real.
So it's real for a lot of people. It's real. So obviously for youth, it's real because the gender affirming clinics have been shut down for youth in, I mean, over half the country, over the half the states in the country. And even in the states where it hasn't been outlawed by the state laws, there are hospitals who are closing their doors to their gender affirming clinics, you know, in anticipation of them being on the wrong end of Trump's ire. So, and yet there are people fighting back. So two good examples are Boston Children's Hospital. Trump put in a subpoena asking for all of the records of everybody who had had gender affirming care for that, and they refused, and they succeeded in not having to give up that information. And the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center closed down their gender affirming care department despite the fact that it's not state law in Pennsylvania, and they're being sued by trans people to get it back open again. So, you know, every time it happens, there is somebody out there who is trying to take legal recourse to prevent it from happening. But I think what is really frightening is, and obviously everybody who is in any kind of a minority or in a position of vulnerability in this country is experiencing the same thing, is the intent is very clearly to make it impossible to be trans in this country. And that intent is being pursued far more aggressively, I think, than any of us really expected it to be. I mean, they're just not letting up. And so if the intent is being pursued that aggressively, and we're only a year in, and we've got another 3 years, and then who knows how many beyond that, you know, it does make one wonder how long this is going to be possible for.
Well, and you mentioned being a perpetual optimist, and I've also been accused of being a Pollyanna on occasion. But I will say, you know, growing up in the 90s in Georgia, where I was having sex for the first time as a gay man, I was a criminal, right? I mean, it was illegal in Georgia to be having sex. I was also a teenager having sex with an older man. And so the feeling of being an outlaw from youth to now, I think that was the big cognitive dissonance for many of us of a certain age, was when we became mainstreamed and when we became acceptable, and we suddenly were like, everyone's like, everything's fixed. You got marriage, everything is done. You're done. Like, we don't need to give you any special rights, any special privileges, because you're accepted. And I'm going to connect this to what you were talking about in the 2010s. I went to a fundraising event for Ali Forney, which is a center in New York that provides care and housing for queer youth who are often homeless, and gives them advocacy and other things. And David Mixner was there, and he actually said, you know, these are our children. These are the people we said come out. We started coming out, and we told everybody to come out, and now they're being kicked out on the streets. They're being disenfranchised. They're being marginalized. And these are our children, and we need to protect them. And what you were saying earlier about that, about how we had this wave of trans people coming out of gay people coming out and saying this is the way to live, and then we're seeing now that people are at risk. To go back to your privilege thing, which I also love that you start your book talking about that, right? You talk about being privileged and what we can do with that, and I've been trying to use whatever privilege I might have to be of help and to be part of the resistance. So I agree with you that if one feels unsafe, that you should try to take the actions you need to do to protect yourself. But I also hope that people who do feel like they have some level of privilege, I think Dale Corvino is on here, and we were talking the other day, and he talked about getting trained to be able to go with a friend who needed to go to the immigration court to help them, right? And then and I was talking to a civil rights lawyer last night, and she was talking about how crazy it is right now, and I'm just hoping that the people who do have access to the levers of power or have some level of privilege use it.
Yeah,
And
well,
don't.
exactly, and that's the thing, and and we're seeing this everywhere. I mean, was chatting with a friend last night whose friend just got picked up by ICE a couple of days before and is now in a holding cell down in Pennsylvania. And this is a 49-year-old man who's been in the country ever since he was 6 months old and has a green card. And now he's and has a family and everything. And she was on the first, he got picked up and wasn't allowed time to pick up his heart medication. So she drove 5 hours to give him his heart medication. And her friends were like going, "Are you not scared? You're going to end up on a list." And she's like, what are you going to do? Just not show up? These are the risks that we have to take. And, some people have said to me, "Are you going to stop writing?" And I did briefly stop writing, but it wasn't because I was afraid of writing. It was because I was so overwhelmed by what was going on. I didn't know how to put anything into words.
Yeah.
So there was a pause there where I'm like, I don't even know how to write about this stuff. And also specifically, I just don't want to turn what's going on into like pointless content.
Right.
If we're going to have conversations, let's have conversations that are helpful. And people like Erin Reed are doing such an amazing job of keeping us all informed about what's going on. We don't need somebody else doing that. We need more people to be following and supporting Erin Reed so that she goes on having the, funds to be able to do what she's doing. So I don't want to write anything unless it's directly, helping in a way that fills a hole. But that is why I wrote that one piece, because I think that that this is something that so many people are feeling. And that was the response that I got from a lot of trans people is like, yeah, we need to be talking more about this and trying to figure out what we can do and what we can't do and what the solutions are. Because, only a few months ago, if you had a trans kid and you were in a state that banned gender affirming care, the solution was to move to another state. But now you've got people who have already moved from one state to what they thought was a safe state. And then the gender affirming care clinic in the safe state shuts down, not because they have to, but because they're too afraid of losing their funds to remain open. And then you've got this family who then has to face moving again. And families can't afford to do that. So I mean, as you say, the people who I really almost feel more sorry for than anybody else at the moment are the parents of the trans kids, because they have told their kids that it's safe to do this. They've got their kids to a point where the kid feels like, okay, I can do this. It's safe. My parents have got my back. They're going to look after me. I've got a good doctor. This is going to be okay. We're talking to the schools. Everything's going to be fine. And then suddenly this, and you're talking about children. It's sort of beyond comprehension, really.
So this is a slight pivot, but I love that you're talking about the parents, because one of the most poignant parts of your book is with your son, Freddie. You kind of don't even come out to the twin girls because they come out for you. They're like, "Oh, you're a man. Okay, great." But then you're talking to him and he says, "I just want you to be my mom." And what I thought was really heartbreaking is when he says like, "Oh, these guys online are saying that all trans people have mental health issues. Do you have mental health issues?" And you're like, "No, and I'm always going to be your mom," and that sort of thing. And it was really a beautiful moment. And I think I just want people to read it and experience just that, of like having a parent just being an amazing parent. So, because it's really difficult for all queer people when they're young also, because often we have heterosexual parents who the first thing they think is, how did I ruin my kid? How did I damage my kid? And so you were dealing with it from the other side, is like, how am I going to damage my kids by being me?
Exactly that. And that is that is something that I've really struggled with, right? Because it has been hard for my kids. There's just no question about it. This is not an easy thing for kids to go through. And yet I couldn't not do it. So then you have to work out that kind of dialectic of, how do you balance your needs with your children's needs? And, what is the collateral damage here? And ultimately the collateral damage of me not transitioning would have been far greater than me transitioning and then helping them come to terms with that transition. Because I just couldn't function before I transitioned. And so I wouldn't have been able to function as a parent anyway. And so therefore you have to make that decision to do what you need to do. It's the oxygen, it's the cliche, but it is the oxygen mask thing. You got to put the oxygen mask on first, so then you can attend to the kids. But this goes back to the unbelievable cruelty of preventing trans kids from transitioning based on this idea of, you're going to sterilize them and they might want to be parents, without understanding that what you're doing is you are creating a situation where an adult may then have to go through what I went through, which is far more damaging. I mean, there are ways to have children. There are ways to freeze eggs or sperm or adopt or use surrogates or whatever you want to do. But first of all, you've got to be capable of parenting, and you can't be capable you can't be a good parent if you haven't addressed your own identity first. I really, truly believe it's impossible, because I experienced it. I was irritable. I was angry. I was depressed. I was invisible. That's not a good state for a parent to be in. So the illogic behind a lot of what is happening is what I find so distressing. It's the same with the sports stuff. This gets brought up time and time again. It's like, you can't have men competing in women's soccer teams. And the people who are saying that are the same people who are saying that the trans girls should not be allowed to transition pre-puberty. But if they were, they would never have testosterone in their body in the first place, and then this wouldn't be an issue. But they cut them off at the legs before they even get there, and then say, well, now you've been through male puberty, you can't have access to the bathrooms, and you can't have access to the sports teams, and, we're going to turn you into monsters and all the rest of it. And yet they're saying, but I don't want to go through it anyway. It just doesn't make any logical sense. And I know we all know that it doesn't make any logical sense, but it just bears repeating that the cruelty is that if they want everybody to pass, then let the kids transition.
Yeah. And I think if you've never met a trans child, you might not understand it either. I mean, I obviously had the privilege of, when I was at Out Magazine, meeting these young kids who were just amazing. And I was like, oh, wow, like this is, you've taught me so much. Like you seem so authentic and self-actualized at 12. How the hell did this happen?
I know. But my first book, Adult Human Male, was written in response to the gender critical feminists in England. And, this is the work that they did. This is the groundwork that they did back in 2020, when they started publishing the books that came out of England, and it was all about protect the women and the children. And so they laid that groundwork that the evangelicals and the right-wing Republicans picked up on over here, which was to suggest that the amount of people who were coming out of trans was something unprecedented, terrifying, and everybody was going to get carried away, without understanding that there's actually a relatively small proportion of the people of the kids who are identifying as genderqueer who want to go on and take puberty blockers and hormones and then ultimately have surgery if and when they need it. And that is done so carefully and with so much support and kindness and patience from the parents and the doctors and the therapists and all the adults around them. it's not, but then you have Trump saying, your kid is going to go into school as a girl one day and come back as a boy the next, and they're going to be performing, sex change operations without the parents' knowledge. It's just absolute nonsense. And it's all fear mongering. But once that fear is set in people's heads, they can't see past it. You can't get past that fear to the logic that is like, of course this isn't happening.
Well, let's talk about that fear also within our own community, because there has been a sort of disenfranchisement amongst the L, the G, the B, and the T. And I think because I'm a white gay male, sometimes people will say things in front of me that they might not say in front of you. And there is a sort of feeling sometimes, and, Andrew Sullivan has written about this. You're just trying to get rid of the gays, right? Like, and there are some straight parents that I think would be happier with a trans child than they would a gay or lesbian child sometimes, because they think it would be easier. How do you respond to those types of things when you?
I mean, absolutely astonishing to think that anybody would think that it would be easier being trans than being gay,
right?
Because it just categorically isn't.
Right.
So 2 angles to that. The first one I'll pick up on the theme of my first book, Adult Human Male, which was that these boundaries that we put around these identities don't exist.
Right.
Right. So when you create a boundary, so for example, when you create a boundary between a lesbian and a trans man, that boundary doesn't exist. What you simply have is somebody who is trying to self-actualize as what they are. And if you say you have to choose between identifying as a lesbian or a trans man, then that person will choose one of those labels. But if you say to them, look, forget the label and just become who you want to be, then that person will just become what they want to be.
Right.
And so it's proposed as like it's a zero-sum game. The more trans men there are, the less lesbians there are. But this is not the case. You've just got people who are able to actualize who they are on a more refined level.
Right.
So, I am the same person that I was when I identified as a lesbian. The fact that I now identify as a trans man doesn't mean that I have been removed somehow from the queer community, or that I have been removed from the group of people who still care about the rights of lesbians.
Right.
Right. And so that was something that I came up against when I transitioned, was people saying, well, you've just opted out of the lesbian community now, so you're not one of us, so you don't stand for feminism.
Right.
And I'm like, that's just insane. Of course I stand for feminism. Of course I care about gender equality. Of course I care about all of these things as much as I ever did. I'm not transitioning so that I can gain male privilege and not have to worry about that stuff.
Although you did question getting testosterone for that reason, right? You said, maybe I don't want to do that to myself at the beginning.
Yes, I did, because I didn't want to exclude myself from that group.
Right.
Because I was frightened of how that would be perceived, that it would be perceived as a betrayal. And also, when I transitioned, I did gain male privilege.
Right.
That was a real thing. So all of those things come into play, but ultimately these are social issues that have got nothing to do with how I manifest my identity.
Right. But you also did have a loving relationship, and you went through heartbreak because of it, because you were dating a lesbian, and yet in some ways she was right? She was like, you need to go find yourself, and I don't need to be there as an anchor pulling you back.
Yes. I mean, 100%. And and I've said this before, it took me a long time to be able to say she was right. But yeah, she was right. I mean, she didn't want to date a man. And as long as I was in a relationship with her, I would have adapted my identity to suit her. Or I would have tried to go on doing that. I don't know how long I would have managed, but I would have tried to go on doing that. And I would never have been able to become what I am, because I would have been so conscious of how that was not what she wanted, and that wasn't what she fell in love with. And to give her due, rather than saying, I don't want you to transition, she said, you're going to transition and you should transition, and I don't want to hold you back, so I'm getting out.
Right.
And then at the time when you're in a place where you are so terrified and so vulnerable, and you don't know what the hell is going on, and you're terrified you're going to lose everybody, and you're also terrified that no one is ever going to love you again if you're trans, which is a very real fear for trans people. And you're terrified that you were attractive as a woman, and then you're going to be less attractive as a trans man, which is the same reverse. If you're a gay man, you may have some social cachet within the gay community that you will lose if you transition. Losing somebody who you are in love with at that time is devastating.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it was the right thing to have done. Just, you have to get a few years past how painful it is to be able to look.
Well, and as you said at the beginning, you were a teenager in an adult body.
Yes, exactly. Experiencing heartbreak for the first time. And the first heartbreak is always the most devastating, isn't it? Because you're not prepared for it. I mean, I was completely unprepared for it.
Well, so I know I'm never looking for easy answers, but we did touch on what do we do? So what do we do, Oliver, wise one? What should we be doing?
Okay, so sign up for Erin Reed's newsletters, donate to the ACLU, see if you can find local grassroots organizations to donate to and support, write to your state representatives. Whatever state you're in, write to your state representatives. And here, and I'm going to go into the sort of political realm here for a little bit.
Yeah.
This is a complicated one. So I'm going to write about this at some stage. I'm still trying to formulate it in my mind. Trans rights shouldn't be on the docket. Right? Trans rights shouldn't be part of any political party's political struggle. I don't think the Democrat Party wants it to be. The Republican Party has made it an issue because they've seen it as a wedge issue. They've seen it as a divisive issue, and they see trans people as a really easy way of representing what they call the extreme radical left.
Right.
Because we look different, we're new, we're unusual, we're very easy to fearmonger about. A lot of people are very uncertain about who we are and what we represent. So we're a very good emblem, and as Trump has started calling us trans Tifa, we're a very good way of saying, if you vote for the Democrats, you are voting for these crazy mass murdering weirdos over here. The Democrats are then forced into this position where either they defend us and then play into that idea that they are defending these very extreme left-wing ideologists, or they cease to defend us and then our rights get thrown under the bus. And a good example of this is in the bill that's, potentially causing the shutdown at the moment. I mean, we get cited in, Donald Trump recently posted this thing on Truth Social where, in a group of like 5 issues that he's citing, transgender people are 3 of them.
Yeah.
We should not be that important in American politics, but the right know that this is a successful way of launching this campaign against the left. So the crucial thing is to write to your senators, whether you're in a red state or in a blue state, and say, please don't throw trans people under the bus. Do not capitulate, because it's beginning to happen.
Right.
Eric Adams is thinking about passing a bathroom bill in New York, and there are blue states who are considering, banning gender-affirming care and stopping, trans women from playing in sports, and all of these. And these are like the thin end of the wedge. Once this starts happening, it just, then the Republicans aren't going to stop. There is no small amount of capitulation that is going to say to the Republicans, oh, good, well, they, because they don't care about the issues. They care about using us as a weapon.
Right.
So,
and at the core of this, and Dale brings this up, is the idea of bodily autonomy. And you actually write about that really well in the book, because you're like, this is my body. I can do with it what I want. But of course, we're being told that's not true for many different ways. And this is part of that as well. And so Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is also another organization that still is helping with gender affirming care and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you find out that your local hospital is planning on shutting it down, go and protest. Write to your state representative, ask them to support. It's just all of those small things, because it is really sort of one local battle at a time at the moment. Because the big stuff we can't do anything about, as apart from vote. I'll be out in a sec. That's a teenager knocking at my door. But if you go small and local, you can actually help. And so small and local is the way to go. Find out what's happening near you and support them. Find out who are the trans people who are doing grassroots organizations through you and support them.
And to go back to what you said earlier about not feeling inspired to write, I do believe that storytelling is a form of resistance and a way of soft protest, and that people need to know the stories. And I really do think that they should read your book or listen to your book, because you get an understanding, if you don't understand what it means to be a trans man or a trans parent or a queer person, in a way that people still need to be educated, and we have to tell stories. You can't be silent. I do still believe in silence equals death. So
100%. And I'm writing a novel at the moment, which all of this comes into. So,
okay.
but the joy about writing something in long form is it really gives me the opportunity to go into it in real depth, which I'm finding easier than on Substack at the moment, where, every time I write something, it feels important. It feels like life or death, because it is life. For a lot of people, it is life or death. So yeah, I'm certainly not going to stop writing. The only time that I held back was over the Charlie Kirk stuff, because as so many people in the trans community did when Ezra Klein. I'm a huge fan of Ezra Klein, but I disagree with him so strongly about what he wrote about, Charlie Kirk doing politics the right way, that I was in the middle of writing a Substack with a counter argument to that, and a friend of mine called up and said, "Don't, because the right wing, they're going through, they're looking for it, and they're doxing people, and this is just not right now." And I did actually listen to that, because I don't want to be on the receiving end of that right now.
Yeah, and I actually do think it makes sense to pick and choose the battles. And that was one. When I first heard about the shooting, I was like, oh, when I was a Rolling Stone, we'd been covering him since he was in college, and I knew about him really well. But majority of people have no idea who he was.
Yeah.
And then to see the fallout of that has been bizarre. So I agree with that. Like, there was no point for me either to wade into that.
Yes, and in the end, so many other people wrote about what I would have written about it, that was fine. That was like covered by a lot of people in the end, because there were so many people saying, "Whoa, we've got to think about how we actually talk about this."
Well, I'm not going to take too much more of your time. This has been great. I'm glad that we finally connected and were able to share all of this. And I'm going to do a recap post, so everyone who joined and wants to get some of these resources, you'll be able to find them. And I saw some of the notes in here. People are excited about the novel, and also talking about bodily autonomy. And so,
and the memoir is out in paperback as of a couple of weeks ago. So,
great!
If you want to read the memoir, you can now get it in paperback, which is good news for everybody.
And I have to say, it's great in audio, because you narrated, and it's really great to hear your voice telling these stories. So thanks a lot, and keep up the writing, and we'll be in touch, and hopefully we'll publish something by you on Queer Love Project one of these days, if you feel up to it.
I'd love to. And thank you so much for inviting me on.
This has been great. Thanks.
It really
and thanks everybody for joining us.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.